Welcome back to Jersey Matters. I'm Larry Mendte. The governor made a decision this week on reopening schools in New Jersey. The NJEA, the teachers union, was part of those discussions. On Wednesday, we talked to Sean Spiller, vice president of the New Jersey Education Association. As always, thank you so much for doing this, and congratulations. You're now mayor of Montclair, New Jersey.
Yes, I am. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
It's interesting because when we talk about schools reopening, you're wearing two different hats, and I don't know if you have conflicting feelings because of the two different hats. We'll get into that, but let me start off with the NJEA. What is your position on schools reopening?
First and foremost, I think we need to be guided by the data, look at the science, and use that to make a determination. I know we all have a date in our minds because we're used to, September, schools open. But I think it's important that we continue to look at what is the data telling us, what are the trends, what's happening throughout the nation. If we look back only 6 weeks ago, how different the landscape looked versus now, I think it's easy to assume that 6 weeks from now, it'll look pretty different as well. So I think we have to keep making sure, and Governor Murphy's done a great job with this, make sure we keep looking at the science, listening to what the experts tell us, and seeing if it is possible for us to do it safely. That's got to be the primary concern.
You talked about all the things that should be taken into consideration, but a decision has to be made. What is the position? Does the NJEA want schools to reopen for in-person, in-class teaching?
Well, I'm glad you framed it that way because I think it's important for parents out there, especially and others, to note schools have always been open. They were open. They switched to a virtual learning environment. But what you note, the in-person component is really what we're talking about. And I think our position is really around districts right now, and we support the governor's stance on this, is that districts need to be preparing for what does an in-person component look like? What does a virtual experience look like? What does a hybrid look like? I know districts throughout the state are working with many teams to try and determine that. And it's important, while time-consuming to kind of go down these different paths, it's important because we just don't know. And if you're not planning for all of these different possibilities, you're not doing what you should, because who really knows which way that's going to happen.
The conversation is going much different than I thought it was going to go. It sounds like the NJEA is not against opening up the schools for in-class learning.
Well, I think it's really district by district are working on those plans.
But you're not going to stand in the way of any district.
What was that?
You're not going to stand in the way of any district, though. You're okay with this.
Well, I think that's too early to say. And what I mean by that is if we keep seeing a spike in other states that we're seeing, if it unfortunately comes home here to New Jersey a little bit more than it is, if we're seeing that, and I think the real worry for people is nobody's really shown an indoors environment. I mean, the governor himself has noted in a few interviews, right, the nature of this virus, indoors versus outdoors. So we're seeing that restaurants haven't opened their indoor component. We're seeing a lot of other entities as well. And places that have done the in-person, indoors aspect of whatever their business or other thing is, has led to a real spike in the virus. So unless we're seeing that this can be done safely, and I think it's no surprise to any parent out there, if you're getting a student, whatever age, it's not as easy to make sure they continue to wear their mask all day. It's not as easy to make sure they keep having the 6-foot distance. So it's one thing to say these are what the rules need to be. It's another thing to have a young person follow that. If we can't meet those pieces, we will stand in the way and say this is not appropriate. We can't do it. I think we're in that. We need to give it space. We need to be part of the conversation and productively working towards the different scenarios. But at any point, and I would say honestly, I think we're getting closer to that. If we're seeing what we're seeing in other states and we're seeing the science and the data behind it that says you can't really do it safely, then we are going to be ones out there saying, let's get a great virtual experience for our students. Let's figure out what the in-person components that we really need are and how we can provide that maybe in a very limited way or maybe in a we meet the students way. But we have to have those conversations.
I'm sure you've seen this. This was a commentary that was done by two pediatric infectious disease specialists from the University of Vermont that was in the journal Pediatrics. It went through research from around the world. And this Dr. Roska said the data are striking. The key takeaway is that children are not driving the pandemic. The title of the article is "Children Don't Transmit COVID-19. Schools Should Reopen in the Fall." If we're following data and experts, this is an expert with data, should that be taken into consideration?
It should be, along with a lot of other data. I mean, I think we've all seen the studies as well. I think the most recent one I was just listening to, I forget who exactly it was by, was saying that kids over a certain age transmit the virus at the same rate as adults. And I think I'm a high school teacher, so I think those were the high school age kids that study looked at. So there's a lot of different data out there. I think as in any early, virus that we're still learning about, the information isn't really clear. So I think the challenge around it is we've got to look at all of that together. It's not one study on its own, but it's all of it to say, what are the trends showing, what's happening in other places. We can kind of see some of this. And also what are the studies that are out there showing in terms of our students. But we also know that schools are not just students all coming together, right? We have a lot of adults that work in our schools, and us as a teacher, working with our custodian, working with our bus driver who drops the kids off, working with our aide in class, working with, I get, what the student data piece is, but we've got a lot of adults that make a school work, and how all of that fits together. We don't want a scenario where you've got a virus which largely or potentially goes undetected for a period of time, spreads throughout a school, which is the perfect vector to get it throughout our community, and then we're in a space where we're in big trouble.
Let me sum this up by asking you where you believe this is going, and if they are reopening, what you believe at this point the NJEA's response is going to be.
This is more of a personal question, just because I think you probably ask the 7-8 of us in a room at any one time, you'll probably get 7 or 8 different answers. But from my perspective, and certainly the trends that I'm seeing as we follow this organizationally, I am of the position, it does not appear to me that at least come the early September, we are on pace to be able to reopen schools in person as we're kind of, even in the new normal. I think it's really going to be a more virtual experience with some in-school components, or maybe, again, pieces that meet our students where they are at their homes or other remote locations to help provide some of the pieces that are needed. But I just think that the amount of scared educators who reach out all the time. I mean, the amount of emails and calls that we are receiving, the amount of parents who are reaching out worried about this. I just cannot see a situation where there's a large number of parents that aren't going to send their students. There's a large number of educators, as you asked me about before, who are going to need to opt out because of health reasons. There's a large number of infrastructure that just won't be able to be there. I think, sooner rather than later, we are going to have a real conversation about, what does a more virtual environment look like? It doesn't have to be what it did last time. Remember, that happened on a day or two's notice. I mean, literally a day or two's notice, we were virtual. This is a real opportunity to do that with some real thought, real planning, making sure our students get what they need, making sure for students who might need physical therapy or other components can get that in a way. There are ways to do that if we decide early on and early enough that we are going mostly virtual, we can make sure our students keep getting what they need. So you're asking me, I don't see us opening in person in September.
Well, we're recording this on a Wednesday. We'll know by the time this airs. We'll see how well you did with that.
That's right. I've been wrong in predictions before, so you'll see me in September. We'll all be touring classrooms. So right, maybe dead wrong, but I don't see it right now.
That was Sean Spiller, Vice President of NJEA. When we come back, you'll meet a man who spent 55 days on a ventilator and survived COVID-19. That's when we come right back.